On my 16th birthday, my parents made me serve cake to their friends while they laughed about how I was the ugly one of the family. But what they didn't know, my former teacher was there, and he didn't stay silent this time. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You deserve so much better than this." I grew up in a sleepy neighborhood just outside Pittsburgh called Baldwin Borough. The kind of place where every yard had a seasonal flag, and the biggest gossip was who let their dog poop without picking it up. From the outside, our family looked average. A modest two-story home, dad worked for the college, mom was a nurse, two daughters in school, lawn mowed once a week. But inside, it was different. From as early as I can remember, I was treated as an afterthought in my family. My older sister Fiona was the star of the show, literally. She did pageants, had braces by 11, and always got her school portraits retaken if her hair was out of place. I was the quiet one. I had a birthmark over one eye, a chipped tooth from a fall off my bike, and hand-me-down clothes that still smelled like Fiona's perfume even after multiple washes. No one ever said I was ugly. Not directly, but they didn't have to. They said it in other ways, like when my mom would scoff, "Some girls just blossom later," whenever someone asked about us. Or when my dad laughed that I'd make a great librarian, no boys to distract you. Or when Fiona said I'd better get smart, because I wasn't gonna skate by on looks. But the worst thing they did was pretend it was normal. So by 16, I'd trained myself not to expect much. That birthday, a Saturday, I didn't even ask for a party. I knew better. But when I woke up, there was a note on the fridge that said, "Be dressed by 2. Company coming." I thought maybe this year would be different. A surprise party, maybe, or at least a dinner with cake that I didn't bake myself. By 2 p.m., the house started filling with guests. People I barely recognized. Most were coworkers of my parents. A few were neighbors. Fiona had some friends over, too, even though it wasn't her birthday. The house smelled like roasted chicken and sugar. My mom was in her element, arranging dishes, topping off wine glasses. Dad was already on his second beer, cracking jokes and loud laughing. Fiona wore a new sundress that twirled when she walked. I was in an old green dress that used to be hers. At first, I just lingered by the kitchen. But then my mom handed me a tray with little squares of hummingbird cake and said, "Serve these, will you? Start with the living room." No, please. Just a command. I didn't argue. I'd learned not to. As I walked into the living room, people barely looked at me. I offered cake, they took it, maybe mumbled thanks. I was invisible. Background, a server in my own house. No one said happy birthday, and then I heard it. From across the room, a woman I didn't recognize chuckled, "Fiona's so photogenic. I saw the pictures from the lake trip." "Your other one, what's her name? She's a bit more shy, isn't she?" My dad laughed. "Yeah, Naomi's more of an indoor type. You know, artistic, keeps to herself." My mom joined in. "She's got a good heart, though. That's what matters when the looks don't come through." There was laughter, real laughter. Not mean-spirited, but casual, comfortable, like they'd said something agreeable. I froze in the middle of the room, tray still in my hands. I wanted to believe I misheard, but I didn't. I stood there, cake in hand, while my parents laughed about me, about my face, about how I was the ugly one. That moment cracked something open in me I didn't know was still whole. Then a voice, calm, firm, cutting through the noise, said, "I don't find this funny." It was Mr. Lachlan, my 8th grade English teacher. I hadn't even noticed him until then. He'd been sitting quietly on the edge of the room, near the window. He had a piece of cake in one hand and his other hand on his knee, still as a stone. My mom blinked. "Sorry," he stood. "This isn't funny. You're talking about your daughter like she's a blemish on your family photo. That's not banter. That's cruelty." People started shifting uncomfortably. Someone cleared their throat. My dad smirked. "Look, Lachlan, it's just a joke." He turned to me. And then he said, "Naomi, you deserve so much better than this." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't scold or yell. He just looked at me and said it like a fact. Like the sky is blue, like gravity works, like you deserve better. He set his plate down and walked out. And for a long moment, nobody said anything. Then someone awkwardly laughed. My mom tried to brush it off. "Well, that was weird." My dad rolled his eyes. Fiona whispered to her friend and they giggled. But I just stood there, tray still in hand, burning with something that was halfway between humiliation and relief. Because someone finally said what I couldn't. I told Dorian all of that. I expected him to be mad. But he just looked sad. "You never told anyone?" he asked. No one ever asked. He didn't push, he just reached for my hand, and for the first time I let myself cry over it, not just the cake, not just that moment, but the years before it, the quiet neglect, the emotional starvation, the way I'd accepted it all as my fault. That was the moment everything changed, but it took years before I really acted on it. I left home at 18 for an arts program in Philly. I kept in touch with Mr. Lachlan through letters for a few years. He was the first person I ever dedicated a book to, but I never went back home. Not really. Now my parents send cards. Occasionally an email. Fiona likes to tag me in old family photos as if nothing happened. Dorian thinks I should tell them why I cut contact, that I should finally say what they did to me. I don't know if I'm ready, but writing this here is my first step. After I told Dorian everything that night, he didn't say much. He just sat with me on the couch, holding my hand, thumb rubbing small circles over my knuckles, while the silence between us stretched in a way that didn't feel heavy for once. I think he knew there wasn't much to say, that this wasn't about solutions, not right away. But the next morning, over coffee, he asked me something that stuck with me. If you never saw Mr. Lachlan again, how would you feel? I didn't know how to answer. I hadn't thought about him in years. He'd written to me until around my early 20s. We exchanged maybe 5 or 6 letters before the trail naturally ended. He was always kind, never invasive, never pried about my family, just asked about my art, gave feedback, told me he was proud, the way you'd imagine a good parent might. I think I'd feel regret, I finally said. Not because I didn't thank him properly, but because he might not know what that moment meant for me. Dorian nodded. So maybe that's where you start. Not with your parents, not with confrontation, just with the people who made you feel human. That stuck with me. I didn't reach out right away, though. Life didn't exactly pause for emotional revelations. Our son had a cold. I had 2 clients at work who were both navigating divorces that felt way too close to home. Dorian was prepping for a business trip to Chicago. It would have been easy to let that conversation fade, like so many before it. But something was different this time. That week, I started having these vivid, strange dreams. Not nightmares exactly, but replays. Flashbacks, only slower, quieter. I'd dream I was back in our old living room, but I was the age I am now. Standing in that green dress, holding the cake tray, only this time I wasn't afraid. This time I was watching. Watching a younger version of myself listen to people laugh about her. Watching her shrink. Watching her scan the room for someone, anyone, who might say something. And every time Mr. Lachlan stood up. Every time he said it. You deserve so much better than this. And I'd wake up with tears on my pillow. Eventually, I dug out the old letters. They were in a shoebox in our basement, sandwiched between college notebooks and a dried-up fountain pen I once thought made me look like a real writer. The last letter from him was dated November 2009. I was 19 and newly accepted into my college's illustration program. His handwriting was still firm, slanted right, steady. He'd written, "It's funny how many people will go through life without ever realizing how much damage they cause in silence. But you, Naomi, you'll never be one of them. You feel too much, and that's a gift, even when it hurts." It was one of the last things he said to me. I never replied. I think I was too focused on starting a new life, one where people didn't see me as damaged or fragile. I found an address on the envelope. He'd retired and moved to a small town called Tionesta, north of Pittsburgh, near the Allegheny National Forest. I Googled it, and to my surprise, the address was still listed in the white pages. It took me 2 more days to write the letter. I rewrote it 4 times before I finally settled on something short, honest, and direct. Dear Mr. Lachlan, you probably don't remember my 16th birthday, but I do, every detail. You stood up for me in a room full of people who never had. You said 6 words that rewired my whole life. I never properly thanked you. This letter is me doing that now. I'm married. I have a son. I'm a therapist now. I use art and trauma work with my clients. I write, I speak. I try every day to be the kind of person you made me believe I could become. You were right. I did deserve better. Thank you for showing me that. Warmly, Naomi Fields. I mailed it the next day. I didn't expect a reply. Honestly, I was okay with that. It felt like closure even just sending it. But the letter did something else too. It stirred everything back up. Like turning over a rock and realizing there's an entire ecosystem living underneath. Feelings I thought I'd buried came crawling out. Shame, guilt, and something harder to name. Grief, maybe, for the childhood I didn't get to have. I started seeing a new therapist, not because my husband thought I needed to, but because I knew I'd hit a wall I couldn't climb over alone. Her name's Ria. She's quiet, gentle, doesn't interrupt me when I pause, which I do often. During one session, I mentioned how I never actually said the words out loud to my parents. That they were cruel, she asked. I nodded. And do you think saying it would change them? No, I said. But maybe it would change me. Dorian kept checking in, never pushing, just leaving the room. One night we were in bed and he said, I want to tell our son that he comes from strong people. That his mom is the strongest woman I know. But it's hard when I feel like the people who hurt you still get a chapter in your life. I didn't answer right away, but I thought about it long after he fell asleep. Because he was right. They still had a chapter. Maybe more than one. And even if I hadn't spoken to them in years, they were still characters in the story I told myself about who I was. And I was tired of giving them that power. 2 weeks later, I got a response to my letter. It came in the mail, handwritten, folded neatly into a card with a watercolor illustration of a treehouse on the front. Inside was a note from Mr. Lachlan. Naomi, I remember that day very clearly. I remember the look on your face. I've thought about it more times than I care to admit. Thank you for writing. You didn't have to, but I'm glad you did. I've followed your work from afar. Your memoir was recommended to me by a friend. I recognized the art style before I even saw the name. You were always meant for more. I'm so proud of you. And for what it's worth. I remember thinking that day in your living room, if no one else tells her, I will. You deserved better, you still do. Always, Samuel Lachlan. I held that letter in my hands for a long time. Not crying, not shaking, just still. Because for the first time, I felt like I could finally move forward. And maybe, finally, I could tell the whole truth. Even if it meant going back to where it started. Even if it meant writing one more letter. To them. I didn't write the letter right away. For weeks, I drafted lines in my head, on the bus, in the shower, folding laundry, but nothing felt right. Everything I came up with either sounded too angry or too polished. Too therapized. Like I was already forgiving them before they even knew what they were being forgiven for. Then one afternoon, while organizing my son's art from preschool, he'd drawn a family of lions. With me as the biggest one, I found myself staring at the drawing. I saw how he'd drawn me tall, bold, with a golden mane that stood out even in crayon. It hit me. I didn't want my parents to break through to this world we'd built, but I did want to take my power back. That's when I sat down and wrote them. Not to rebuild anything, not to offer an olive branch, but to close the book on something that had taken too many chapters of my life. To Alan and Rosemary Fields, I'm writing this not to reconnect, but to express something that I never had the chance, or the voice, to say when I was younger. I know how you saw me. I know the jokes, the whispers, the eye rolls, the comparisons, the indifference. I remember being treated like a shadow in my own home while you polished Fiona into your golden girl. I remember being called the ugly one behind my back, and sometimes not even behind it. But the moment that stays with me most, my 16th birthday, when I served cake at a party that I thought might have been for me, only to realize I was the entertainment. I stood in that room as you laughed with your friends about my appearance, as if I wasn't standing right there, as if my feelings were non-existent. You mocked your daughter, your child. And if it weren't for one man standing up and telling me I deserved better, I don't know how much more time I would have wasted thinking I didn't matter. So here it is, I do matter. I've built a life where I'm loved, where I'm seen. I married someone who shows our son what kindness and empathy look like every single day. I became the person I needed when I was a child, because of your cruelty, not in spite of it. You no longer get access to that life. I am not writing this to forgive. I am not writing this to open the door. I'm writing to end something. From this point on, you are no longer my family. You're just the people who raised me, and you raised me poorly. But I raised myself better. You don't get to be proud of me now. You don't get to say you always knew I'd do well. You don't get credit for anything I've accomplished. Every inch I've climbed came from cutting off the dead weight of your expectations. I am not your failure. I am not your shame. I am not the other one. I am Naomi. And I am done. Naomi Fields, I sent it. Certified mail, with delivery confirmation. I didn't need to know if they read it, I just needed to know they received it. The moment I got that confirmation email, I felt like my lungs had more room to breathe. There was no reply. Not directly anyway, but 2 months later something happened. I got an email from Fiona. Subject: "Do you feel better now?" I sat with it for a day before opening it. When I finally did, it was exactly what I expected: defensiveness disguised as concern. She said I'd blindsided their parents, that they were shocked and devastated, and that Mom had to take time off work. She's been retired for years, by the way. She said she didn't understand why I would write something so cruel and air family grievances like some kind of novel. And the last line: "If you wanted attention, there are better ways to ask for it." I didn't reply. Instead, I screenshotted the email and attached it to a post on my personal blog, which has a small but loyal readership, mostly clients, former students, and fellow therapists. The post was titled, "What Happens When You Stop Playing the Family Scapegoat." I didn't name names, but I told the story of the birthday, the teacher, the letter. I wrote about what it feels like to finally claim your narrative after spending decades as a footnote in someone else's. It went viral, not in a Kardashian way, in a quiet, powerful way. Emails poured in, women in their 50s and 60s saying, "I thought it was just me." One therapist wrote, "I shared this with 3 clients who cried reading it." An editor reached out to ask if I had more stories like this. Fiona emailed me again, furious this time. "You're ruining our family name." I replied with just 2 words, "You did." But here's the real revenge, the kind that doesn't scream, doesn't burn bridges, doesn't post screenshots for clout. The real revenge was seeing my son hand me another drawing last week, this time of a dragon and a knight. The dragon was me. The knight was him. He said, "The dragon saves the knight, not the other way around." And I realized that I had broken the cycle, that they would never hurt him the way they hurt me, not because they don't have access to him, but because he will never need them. I won, not with cruelty, not with rage, but with boundaries, healing, and a life so full they no longer fit inside it. I haven't heard from my parents since Fiona's last message. And honestly, I don't expect to. I don't need an apology. I don't need understanding. I needed freedom, and now I have it.